At my wife's funeral, I watched my daughter Jessica lean over Maggie's casket and whisper to her husband Brad, "When do I get the money?" The words hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. Here I was, clutching Maggie's favorite quilt square in my trembling hands, trying to say goodbye to the woman who'd been my everything for 47 years, and my own flesh and blood was already calculating her inheritance. Jessica's bright yellow blazer stood out like a neon sign among the sea of respectful black attire, her designer heels clicking impatiently on the chapel floor as she checked her diamond watch. When the lawyer called us in 3 days later to discuss Maggie's final wishes, Jessica's entitled smirk vanished faster than morning frost in July. She stormed out of Robert Chen's office, mascara streaming down her cheeks, screaming words I'd never heard from my little girl's mouth. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Colorado spring air carried the scent of blooming lilacs through the windows of Mountain View Memorial Chapel, but all I could smell was the suffocating weight of grief and betrayal. I stood beside Maggie's mahogany casket, my weathered electrician's hands wrapped around a piece of her beloved vintage quilt collection. This particular square, a delicate rose pattern she'd sewn during our early marriage, had always been her favorite. She'd run her fingers over it when she was worried, finding comfort in the tiny, perfect stitches that told the story of her patience and love. The chapel was filled with faces from our 47 years together in Lakewood. Neighbors from Maple Street sat quietly in wooden pews, their eyes red from crying. Maggie's quilting circle occupied the front row, each woman holding a handkerchief embroidered with Maggie's handiwork. My co-workers from the electrical company, men who'd shared coffee breaks and overtime shifts with me for decades, stood along the walls with their wives, their calloused hands folded respectfully. Then there was Jessica. My daughter had arrived 15 minutes late to her own mother's funeral, her yellow blazer so bright it seemed to mock the solemnity of the moment. She'd always been drawn to attention, even as a child, but this felt different, cruel almost. Brad shuffled beside her, his expensive suit wrinkled as if he'd slept in it, his eyes darting around the room like he was looking for an escape route. I'd raised Jessica to be better than this. After Maggie and I adopted her when she was 3 years old, we'd poured everything into giving her opportunities we'd never had. Private schools, dance lessons, college tuition for her real estate degree, even the down payment on her first house in Cherry Hills Village. Maggie had sewn countless quilts to sell at craft fairs, adding every dollar to Jessica's college fund. I'd worked double shifts for years, my hands bleeding from wire cuts and electrical burns, all so Jessica could have the life we'd dreamed of giving her. The service began with Pastor Williams reading from Psalms, his voice echoing off the chapel's high ceilings. Maggie's quilting friends shared memories of her gentle spirit, her generous heart, her way of making everyone feel welcomed in our modest ranch house. Mrs. Patterson from next door spoke about how Maggie had sat with her through her husband's final illness, bringing homemade soup and hand-stitched comfort quilts. During the pastor's eulogy, I caught fragments of Jessica's whispered conversation with Brad. She wasn't listening to the beautiful words about Maggie's legacy of love and service. Instead, she was leaning close to her husband, her voice barely audible but somehow piercing through the sacred atmosphere. "The house alone has to be at least $400,000 now," she murmured, her manicured fingers drumming against her purse. "And those vintage quilts, some of them are worth serious money to collectors." Brad nodded, glancing nervously at the other mourners. "Keep your voice down, Jess."
People are staring. But Jessica wasn't finished. As the congregation stood for the final hymn, Amazing Grace, she tilted her head toward Brad again. "When do I get the money? I mean, she's gone now. There's no reason to wait, right?" The words hit me like a live electrical wire. 47 years of marriage, of building a life together, of loving this child as our own, and all Jessica could think about was what she'd inherit? I gripped the quilt square tighter, feeling the threads strain under my fingers. Mrs. Chen, Maggie's closest friend from the quilting circle, heard Jessica's comment and gasped softly. Her husband, Robert, The lawyer who'd helped us write our wills 5 years ago turned his head slightly, his expression unreadable behind his wire-rimmed glasses. After the service, people filed past the casket to pay their final respects. I watched as neighbors and friends touched Maggie's folded hands, whispered prayers, or simply stood in silent tribute. When Jessica's turn came, she barely paused. No tearful goodbye, no gentle touch, no moment of reflection. She glanced at her watch again and tapped Brad's arm. "How long does this usually take?" she asked, loud enough for several people to hear. "I have a showing at 3. A showing. My wife was being lowered into the ground, and Jessica was worried about a real estate appointment? The woman who taught Jessica to braid her hair, who'd stayed up all night when she had pneumonia at age 7, who'd sewn her wedding dress by hand, deserved better than this cold calculation. The graveside service at Riverside Cemetery was brief but beautiful. Pastor Williams spoke about Maggie's hands, how they'd created beauty and comfort for so many people through her quilts. He mentioned her volunteer work at the homeless shelter, where she donated dozens of warm blankets over the years. As they lowered the casket into the earth, I placed the rose quilt square on top, my final gift to the woman who'd made our house a home. Jessica stood apart from the family grouping, checking her phone messages while dirt was thrown onto her mother's casket. When people approached to offer condolences, she responded with distracted nods and quick handshakes, her eyes constantly scanning the crowd as if looking for someone more important to talk to. After most of the mourners had left, Jessica finally approached me. Her yellow blazer looked even more garish against the cemetery's green landscape, and her smile seemed practiced, rehearsed. "Dad, I'm so sorry for your loss. She was special." I nodded, unable to trust my voice. The grief was still too raw, too overwhelming. "Listen," Jessica continued, glancing around to make sure we were relatively alone. "I know this isn't the best time, but Brad and I were wondering about the estate situation, just so we can plan ahead." Plan ahead? As if Maggie's death was a business transaction that required quarterly projections? "Robert Chen will be in touch," I managed to say, my voice rough with emotion. "There are procedures to follow." Jessica's smile brightened, as if I'd just confirmed her lottery numbers. Of course. I just want to make sure everything goes smoothly. Mom would have wanted that." No, I thought, as I watched her click across the cemetery lawn toward her BMW. Mom would have wanted her daughter to grieve, to remember, to honor the love that had built our family. Mom would have wanted her daughter to cry. That evening, I sat alone in our ranch house on Maple Street, surrounded by Maggie's quilts and the echoing silence of her absence. The house felt too big without her laughter, too quiet without her humming while she cooked dinner. I poured myself a glass of the whiskey we'd been saving for our 50th anniversary, a milestone we'd never reach. On the kitchen table sat a stack of sympathy cards from friends and neighbors, each one filled with genuine love and memories of Maggie. But there was nothing from Jessica. No phone call, no text message, no acknowledgement that she'd lost a mother. Just the echo of her voice asking when she'd get the money.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I walked to Maggie's sewing room, a small space at the back of the house where she'd spent countless hours creating beauty from scraps of fabric. Her quilting frame still held her final project, an intricate star pattern in blues and whites that she'd been working on before the cancer took her strength away. Stacks of vintage fabric filled wooden cabinets, each piece carefully chosen and lovingly preserved. In her desk drawer, beneath patterns and thimbles, I found a letter addressed to me in Maggie's careful handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it, her voice seeming to whisper from the page. "My dearest Harry," it began. "If you're reading this, then my time with you has ended, but my love for you never will. I need you to know that I've been watching Jessica closely these past few years, and my heart breaks for what she's become. The little girl we raised with such hope has lost her way.
blinded by greed and selfishness. I've made arrangements with Robert that will protect you and honor what we've built together. Trust him. Trust the plan. And remember that sometimes the greatest act of love is teaching someone the value of what they've lost. The letter went on to detail her concerns about Jessica's mounting debts, her careless spending, her cold treatment of Brad, and her increasing demands for financial help. Maggie had seen what I'd refused to acknowledge. Our daughter had become someone we didn't recognize, someone who valued money over family, possessions over people. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the drawer, next to a small leather journal I'd never noticed before. The journal's pages were filled with Maggie's thoughts and observations about Jessica's behavior over the past 3 years. The gambling habits she'd tried to hide, the credit card debt she'd racked up buying designer clothes and expensive vacations, the way she'd started calculating the value of our possessions during family visits, her eyes appraising our furniture and Maggie's quilts like items in an auction catalog. My wife had been preparing for this moment, planning for the inevitable confrontation with Jessica's greed. She'd seen what was coming and had armed me with the truth. The morning after the funeral, my phone rang at 7:30 sharp. Jessica's name flashed on the screen, but I let it go to voicemail. I wasn't ready to face her voice, her demands, her complete lack of understanding about what we'd just lost. I sat at the kitchen table where Maggie and I had shared thousands of breakfasts, staring at her empty chair and the half-finished crossword puzzle she'd been working on the day before she died. The voicemail was exactly what I had expected. Jessica's voice, crisp and businesslike, cutting through the morning quiet like a buzzsaw. "Dad, it's me. I know you're probably still processing everything, but we really need to talk about practical matters. Brad's been looking into estate taxes, and there are deadlines we need to consider. I'll stop by around noon. Hope that works for you." Hope that works for me. As if my grief operated on her real estate schedule. I spent the morning walking through the house, touching Maggie's things, her reading glasses on the nightstand, still folded exactly where she'd left them, her coffee mug in the sink, the one with the faded picture of the Rocky Mountains that Jessica had brought back from a school trip 20 years ago, back when she still cared about making us happy. The doorbell rang at 11:45. Jessica had never been good at respecting other people's time, but apparently death had made her punctual. I opened the door to find her standing on my porch in a tailored navy suit, her briefcase in one hand and a folder of papers in the other. Brad lurked behind her, looking like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Dad, you look terrible," Jessica said, pushing past me into the living room. "Have you been eating? You need to take care of yourself." The concern in her voice might have fooled someone else, but I'd raised this child. I knew the difference between Jessica's genuine worry and her calculated manipulation.
This was the voice she used with difficult clients, the tone designed to soften resistance before she moved in for the sale. She settled onto Maggie's favorite armchair without asking, spreading her papers across the coffee table that still held sympathy cards from neighbors. Brad remained standing near the door, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. "I've been doing some research," Jessica began, pulling out printed documents. "Mom's quilt collection is worth more than I thought. I found a collector in Santa Fe who specializes in vintage pieces from the 1950s and 60s. Some of Mom's work could fetch serious money at auction." I watched my daughter reduce 40 years of Maggie's passion to dollar signs and decimal points. Each of those quilts told a story. The wedding ring pattern she'd made for our first anniversary, the baby quilt she'd sewn when we were trying to have children before we learned we couldn't, the comfort quilts she donated to the women's shelter every Christmas. "Jessica," I said quietly, "your mother isn't even buried 24 hours. She looked up from her papers, her expression shifting to that practiced sympathy again. "I know, Dad, and I'm grieving too, but Mom would want us to be practical. She'd want to make sure you're taken care of, and that means making smart financial decisions." Smart financial decisions. Maggie would have wanted her daughter to cry. She would have wanted Jessica to remember the woman who'd stayed up all night sewing Halloween costumes, who taught her to drive in the empty parking lot behind the grocery store, who'd held her hand through her first heartbreak. The house needs work, Jessica continued, flipping through what looked like a real estate assessment. New roof, updated electrical, kitchen renovation. It's probably better to sell as is and invest the money somewhere with better returns. Sell the house. The house where Maggie had planted roses every spring, where we'd hosted Jessica's birthday parties and graduation celebrations, where every room held memories of our life together. Jessica was talking about erasing 47 years like they were outdated inventory. "I'm not selling the house," I said. Jessica's smile tightened. "Dad, I understand the emotional attachment, but you have to think practically. This place is too big for one person, and the maintenance costs alone will eat up your pension. I could find you a nice senior community, something with medical care and activities." A senior community. She wanted to warehouse me like an old appliance she didn't have room for. Brad finally spoke up from his position by the door. "Maybe we should give him some time to think about it, Jess." "Time isn't our friend here," Jessica snapped, her mask slipping for just a moment. "Every day we wait, we're losing money to inflation and market volatility." I studied my daughter's face, searching for any trace of the little girl who used to fall asleep in my lap while I read her bedtime stories. She'd been so different then, so full of wonder and affection. When had that child been replaced by this calculating stranger? "What about the cabin?" Jessica asked, pulling out another set of documents. "The place in Estes Park. It's been in the family for 30 years, but honestly, it's just a money pit. The property taxes alone are killing us, and when was the last time anyone actually used it?" The cabin. Maggie and I had saved for 5 years to buy that little piece of paradise in the mountains. We'd spent every anniversary there, hiking the trails and sitting on the porch watching deer graze in the meadow. Jessica had loved it once too, begging us to take her there every summer, collecting pine cones and building fairy houses out of twigs and moss. "We used it last fall. Your mother loved watching the aspen trees change color." "Dad, be realistic. You can't drive up there by yourself anymore, and the place needs major repairs. The roof leaks, the plumbing's ancient, and don't get me started on the electrical system." She gestured toward me with her pen. "No offense, but you're 72 years old. You shouldn't be trying to maintain a mountain property."
I'd rewired that cabin myself, installed new fixtures and outlets, upgraded the breaker box just 3 years ago. My hands might be more weathered now, but they were still steady, still skilled. "I'm keeping the cabin too," I said. Jessica's composure cracked a little more. "Dad, you're not thinking clearly. Grief can cloud judgment, and you're making emotional decisions that could hurt you financially. Maybe you should talk to someone, a counselor or something." Now I needed professional help because I wouldn't let her liquidate Maggie's memory. The audacity was breathtaking. "What I need," I said, standing up from the couch, "is for my daughter to act like she's lost a mother instead of won a lottery." The words hung in the air between us, sharp and undeniable. Jessica's face flushed red, then went pale. Brad shifted uncomfortably by the door. "That's not fair," Jessica said, her voice rising. "You think I don't care? You think this is easy for me? I'm trying to help you, Dad. I'm trying to make sure you're secure and comfortable for whatever time you have left." Whatever time I had left. Another reminder that in Jessica's mind, I was just another asset to be managed, another problem to be solved efficiently. "I want you to leave," I said quietly. "Dad, please! Let's not fight about this. We can work something out, some kind of compromise." "Leave," I repeated, walking to the front door and opening it. Jessica gathered her papers with sharp, angry movements, shoving them back into her briefcase. "You're making a mistake, Dad, a big one. When you come to your senses, I hope it's not too late to fix the damage." She stalked out, her heels clicking aggressively on the porch steps. Brad paused in the doorway, looking back at me with something that might have been apology in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Harry," he said softly. "For what it's worth, I think Jessica's just scared. About money, about the future. It doesn't excuse it, but take care of yourself, Brad, I said, and closed the door. I stood in my living room, surrounded by the wreckage of Jessica's visit. Her papers had left marks on the coffee table, small creases in the wood that Maggie would have noticed immediately. I could still smell Jessica's perfume, sharp and expensive, overpowering the gentle scent of the lilacs Maggie had planted outside the window. That afternoon, I called Robert Chen. His law office was in downtown Denver, in one of those solid brick buildings that had weathered decades of Colorado winters. Robert had been Maggie's friend long before he became our lawyer, part of her extended family of people who mattered. "Harry," Robert said when he answered the phone, his voice warm with genuine sympathy. "How are you holding up?" "I've been better," I admitted. "Robert, I need to ask you something about Maggie's will. Jessica came by today, and she's got some very specific ideas about what should happen to the estate." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Can you come in tomorrow morning? There are some things Maggie wanted me to discuss with you privately before we move forward with the formal reading." "What kind of things?" "The kind that require a face-to-face conversation. How's 9 o'clock?" I agreed and hung up, feeling a mixture of curiosity and dread. Maggie had been planning something. That much was clear from her letter. But I wasn't sure I was ready to learn what kind of final surprise my wife had prepared for our greedy daughter. That afternoon, I sat in Maggie's sewing room, surrounded by her life's work. Quilts in various stages of completion hung from wooden frames. Their patterns told stories of patience and skill. I ran my fingers over the fabric scraps in her bins, remembering how she'd sort through them like a painter choosing colors for a masterpiece. In the bottom drawer of her sewing cabinet, I found something I'd never seen before. A manila envelope with my name written in Maggie's handwriting, sealed with tape and marked for Harry's eyes only. Inside were photographs, bank statements, and what looked like receipts from Jessica's credit card company.
The photograph showed Jessica at the casino in Black Hawk, feeding bills into slot machines with the focused intensity of an addict. The timestamps indicated she'd been there multiple times over the past 6 months, sometimes staying until 3 in the morning. The bank statement showed cash advances from credit cards, each one larger than the last. The receipts revealed debt that made my electrician's pension look like pocket change. Maggie had been investigating our daughter's secret life, documenting the gambling addiction that explained Jessica's desperation for inheritance money. The evidence was damning and heartbreaking in equal measure. Our little girl, the child we'd loved and nurtured and sacrificed for, had been living a lie, funded by borrowed money and sustained by the promise of our deaths. I closed the envelope and leaned back in Maggie's chair, the weight of revelation settling over me like a heavy quilt. Tomorrow's meeting with Robert couldn't come soon enough. Whatever Maggie had planned, whatever final lesson she'd prepared for Jessica, I was ready to see it through. The house felt different that night, charged with the energy of secrets revealed and justice waiting to be served. Maggie's presence seemed stronger somehow, as if her spirit was gathering force for the confrontation to come. I fell asleep in her chair, surrounded by the quilts she'd made with love, dreaming of the reckoning that awaited our ungrateful daughter. Robert Chen's law office occupied the 3rd floor of a red brick building on 16th Street, the kind of place that smelled like leather-bound books and decades of careful decisions. I arrived early, partly from habit and partly because I hadn't slept well. The elevator creaked as it carried me up, and the hallway stretched before me like a corridor to Judgment Day. Robert's secretary, an elderly woman with kind eyes and silver hair, offered me coffee while I waited. The brew was strong and bitter, matching my mood perfectly. Through the frosted glass of Robert's office door, I could see his silhouette moving around, organizing papers, preparing for whatever conversation Maggie had scripted from beyond the grave. "Harry, come in," Robert called, opening the door with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes.
His office was exactly what you'd expect from a lawyer who specialized in estates and family matters. Dark wood furniture, diplomas on the walls, and photographs of clients' families scattered across his desk. One of those photos showed Maggie at a quilting exhibition, her face glowing with pride as she stood beside her award-winning piece. I settled into a leather chair that probably heard 1,000 family secrets, and Robert pulled out a thick folder marked with Maggie's name. His fingers drummed against the desktop, a nervous habit I'd never seen from him before. "Your wife was a remarkable woman," Robert began, his voice careful and measured. "She came to see me 6 months ago, wanting to revise her will completely. What she told me about Jessica was concerning." He opened the folder and spread several documents across his desk. Bank statements, credit reports, photographs that matched the ones I'd found in Maggie's sewing room. The evidence of Jessica's double life laid out like pieces of a puzzle that painted an ugly picture. "Maggie hired a private investigator," Robert continued. "Maria Santos. Very discreet, very thorough. The gambling debts alone are staggering, Harry. Jessica owes over $200,000 to various creditors, most of it from cash advances and high-interest loans." The number hit me like a physical blow. $200,000. More than I'd made in 4 years as an electrician. More than the down payment on Jessica's house. More than her college education. More than every sacrifice Maggie and I had made for her combined. "There's more," Robert said gently. "The private investigator discovered that Jessica has been forging documents. She took out a second mortgage on her house using falsified income statements, claiming rental properties that don't exist. She's been living on borrowed time and borrowed money for over 3 years."
I stared at the photographs of my daughter at the casino, feeding bills into machines with the mechanical precision of someone completely lost to addiction. This wasn't the little girl who used to help Maggie in the garden, carefully planting seeds and watering them with a tiny watering can. This wasn't the teenager who'd cried when she accidentally backed into a neighbor's mailbox, insisting we pay for the damage even though no one had seen it happen. Maggie suspected something was wrong when Jessica started asking for loans, Robert explained. Small amounts at first, always with reasonable explanations. Car repairs, home improvements, emergency medical bills. But the requests became more frequent, more desperate. "I never knew," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Jessica never asked me for money." "Because Maggie was covering for her. She gave Jessica over $30,000 in the past year alone, money from her quilt sales and her small inheritance from her aunt. Maggie was protecting you from the truth, but she was also enabling Jessica's addiction." Robert pulled out another document, this one sealed in a separate envelope. "Maggie wrote this for you specifically. She wanted you to understand her decisions before we proceed with the will reading." I opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Maggie's handwriting filled 3 pages, her familiar script telling the story of our daughter's fall from grace. She'd watched Jessica's personality change over the years, becoming more manipulative, more focused on money and status. She'd seen the signs of gambling addiction, but hadn't known how to intervene without destroying what remained of their relationship. "I've been giving her money thinking I was helping," Maggie's letter read. "But I realize now that I was just feeding the monster. Jessica doesn't see us as family anymore, Harry. We're her emergency fund, her backup plan, her eventual inheritance. She's already spent our deaths in her mind, calculating what each piece of our life together is worth." The letter went on to detail Maggie's plan for the will reading. She designed it as an intervention, a moment of truth that would force Jessica to confront the reality of her choices. The inheritance would be conditional, tied to Jessica entering gambling addiction treatment and proving her commitment to recovery. "She wanted to save Jessica," Robert said, watching me read. "But she also wanted to protect you from being manipulated after her death. The will includes provisions that prevent Jessica from accessing any funds until she completes a certified addiction program and remains clean for at least 2 years." I looked up from the letter, my mind reeling. What if Jessica refuses treatment? Then the entire estate goes to the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, specifically their programs for women and children. Maggie was very clear about that. Jessica gets help, or Jessica gets nothing. The brilliance of Maggie's plan began to sink in. She'd created a scenario where Jessica would have to choose between her addiction and her inheritance, between easy money and hard recovery. It was tough love on a scale I'd never imagined. "There's one more thing," Robert said, pulling out a final document. Maggie also discovered that Jessica has been pressuring Brad to take out life insurance policies on both of you. Large policies, with Jessica as the beneficiary. My blood turned to ice. Life insurance policies? Jessica hadn't just been waiting for us to die naturally. She'd been planning for it, calculating the payout, treating our debts like a business investment. Bragg refused, Robert continued quickly, seeing my expression. According to Maria's investigation, he's been growing increasingly uncomfortable with Jessica's behavior. There are records of arguments, threats, even suggestions that Brad should leave if he can't support her financial planning. I thought about Brad's apologetic look the day before, his reluctance to participate in Jessica's asset assessment of my house. He had been caught between loyalty to his wife and his own moral compass, and apparently his conscience had won. "When is the will reading?" I asked.
Maggie requested that we wait 1 week after the funeral. She wanted Jessica to have time to reveal her true nature, to make her demands clear. She predicted that Jessica would pressure you to sell assets immediately before any legal proceedings could interfere. Maggie had known our daughter better than I'd realized. She'd anticipated Jessica's greed, her impatience, her complete lack of respect for the grieving process. The week's delay wasn't just legal procedure, it was psychological strategy. "I want to see Maria Santos," I said, "the private investigator. I want to know everything." Robert nodded. "I thought you might. She's available this afternoon if you're ready." I left Robert's office with my head spinning and my heart breaking. The daughter I'd raised, the child Maggie and I had loved unconditionally, had become a stranger driven by addiction and greed. But Maggie had seen a path forward, a chance for redemption wrapped in the harsh medicine of consequences. That afternoon, I met Maria Santos at a small cafe near Washington Park. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with intelligent eyes and the kind of observant stillness that came from years of watching people's secrets unfold. She carried a leather portfolio that contained the detailed documentation of Jessica's secret life. "Your wife loved your daughter very much," Maria said without preamble. "This investigation wasn't about punishment. It was about understanding what had gone wrong and finding a way to fix it." She spread photographs across our corner table, each one telling part of Jessica's story. Pictures of her at various casinos around Colorado, sometimes alone, sometimes with people I didn't recognize. Screenshots of her online gambling accounts, showing the progression from small bets to desperate, massive wagers. Credit card statements that read like a timeline of addiction. "Gambling addiction is a disease," Maria explained. "It changes brain chemistry, alters judgment, destroys relationships. Jessica isn't evil, Mr. Thompson. She's sick. But she's also dangerous to herself and everyone around her until she gets help." "How long has this been going on?" "Based on the financial records, at least 4 years. Probably longer, but she got better at hiding it as the amounts increased. The pattern suggests she started with small bets on football games, moved to online poker, and eventually escalated to the high-stakes tables in Blackhawk." Maria showed me transcripts of conversations Jessica had had with loan sharks, people who charged interest rates that would make credit card companies blush. She'd borrowed money from dangerous people, using her future inheritance as collateral. If she didn't get access to estate funds soon, she'd be in physical danger. "Your wife understood the urgency," Maria continued. "She knew that Jessica's creditors wouldn't wait for probate procedures. That's why the will includes an emergency clause for addiction treatment. If Jessica agrees to enter rehab immediately, some funds can be released to cover her debts and keep her safe." The complexity of Maggie's plan amazed me.
She thought of everything, from Jessica's psychological profile to the practical realities of debt collection. She'd created a lifeline disguised as an ultimatum, offering salvation and demanding accountability in equal measure. "What about Brad?" I asked. "He's been trying to get Jessica help for over a year. He's attended support groups for families of gambling addicts, researched treatment programs, even staged an intervention with Jessica's sister. Jessica threatened divorce if he didn't stop interfering with her decisions." Maria pulled out an audio recording device, no bigger than a thumb drive. "Brad agreed to wear a wire during some of their arguments, with your wife's permission, of course. What you'll hear isn't pleasant, but it shows how desperate Jessica has become." She handed me earbuds, and I listened to my daughter's voice transformed by addiction into something cruel and calculating. Jessica screaming at Brad for refusing to mortgage their house again. Jessica threatening to leave him if he didn't stop questioning her spending.
Jessica coldly explaining that his job was to support her, not judge her, and that she had plans that would solve all their problems once her parents were out of the picture. Once her parents were out of the picture. The words echoed in my mind as I handed back the earbuds. Jessica hadn't just been waiting for our deaths, she'd been counting on them, building her financial strategy around the assumption that Maggie and I would die soon and leave her everything. "The will reading is in 4 days," Maria said, gathering her materials. "Jessica will expect a straightforward inheritance. When she learns about the conditions, she'll have a choice to make. Your wife believed that rock bottom might be the only thing that could save your daughter." I walked home through Washington Park, past families enjoying the late spring weather, children playing on swings while their parents watched with the kind of uncomplicated love I remembered feeling for Jessica. When had that pure affection been replaced by this complex mixture of disappointment, anger, and desperate hope for redemption? That evening, Jessica called again. This time I answered. "Dad, I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday," she said, her voice artificially bright. "I may have come on a little strong. Grief affects people differently, and I understand you need time to process." "Thank you for understanding," I said carefully. "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner tomorrow night. My treat. We could go to that steakhouse downtown, the one Mom always liked. I think it would be good for us to spend time together, as a family." As a family. Jessica's definition of family seemed to involve appraisals and liquidation schedules. But I agreed to dinner. I wanted to see her in action, to observe the manipulation techniques Maria had documented, to understand how completely my daughter had been transformed by her addiction. "Great," Jessica said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I love you, Dad. We're going to get through this together." After I hung up, I sat in Maggie's sewing room, surrounded by the quilts that represented 40 years of patient creativity. Each piece told a story of time invested, care taken, love expressed through careful craftsmanship. Jessica's addiction had turned her into someone who could only see the price tags, who had lost the ability to recognize anything that couldn't be quickly converted to cash. Maggie's plan would force Jessica to choose between 2 futures, one where she got help and slowly rebuilt her life, and one where she got nothing and faced the consequences of her choices alone. It was a gamble, but not the kind Jessica was used to. This bet required her to wager her pride, her addiction, and her sense of entitlement against the possibility of genuine redemption. Tomorrow's dinner would be my chance to see if any trace of the real Jessica still existed beneath the disease that had consumed her. The will reading was only days away, and I needed to be ready for whatever version of my daughter showed up when her fantasy inheritance turned into a harsh reality check. The steakhouse downtown buzzed with the energy of Denver's business district, all polished surfaces and quiet conversations over expensive wine. Jessica had chosen our table carefully, a corner booth where we could speak privately without being overheard. She arrived 15 minutes late, as usual, but her apology seemed genuine enough as she slid into the seat across from me. "Dad, you look better tonight," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. Her touch was brief but calculated, the kind of gesture she'd perfected in her real estate career. I was worried about you yesterday. Sometimes grief can make us say things we don't mean." I nodded, playing the role of the confused, elderly widower she expected me to be. The waiter appeared with menus, and Jessica ordered a bottle of wine that probably cost more than most people's grocery budget. She was performing affluence, projecting success even as her secret debts mounted toward financial catastrophe. "I want to apologize for being so focused on practical matters," Jessica continued once the wine arrived.
Mom's death hit me harder than I realized, and I think I was trying to stay busy to avoid dealing with the emotions. The words sounded rehearsed, like dialogue from a script she'd practiced in her car. I had heard similar speeches from her over the years, whenever she needed to smooth over some conflict or manipulation. Jessica had always been skilled at identifying what people wanted to hear and delivering it with convincing sincerity. "I understand," I said. "Everyone grieves differently." "Exactly." Jessica's smile brightened, and she leaned forward slightly. "That's why I think it's important for us to make decisions together, as a team. Mom would have wanted that." She signaled the waiter and ordered for both of us without asking what I wanted. Prime rib for her, salmon for me, sides chosen to complement her meal rather than accommodate any preferences I might have had. It was a small thing, but it revealed how completely Jessica had stopped seeing me as an individual, with my own needs and desires. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday," she continued, cutting into her steak with precise movements, "about not being ready to sell the house or the cabin. I respect that, Dad, I really do." "Thank you. But I've also been doing some research, and I discovered something that might change your perspective." Jessica pulled out her phone and scrolled through what looked like real estate listings. "There's a community in Golden, specifically designed for active seniors. Beautiful condos, maintenance-free living, a medical center right on campus." She turned the phone toward me, showing pictures of a sprawling complex that looked more like a resort than a retirement home. "The waiting list is usually 2 years, but I happen to know someone on the board. I could get you moved to the top of the list, have you settled in a beautiful new place within 6 months." 6 months. Jessica's timeline for liquidating my life had become more specific, more urgent. I thought about Maria Santos's warning that Jessica's creditors wouldn't wait much longer for payment. This dinner wasn't about grief or family healing. It was about accelerating the conversion of assets into cash. "It sounds very nice," I said carefully, "but I'm not ready to think about moving yet." "Of course not," Jessica said quickly. "I'm just planting seeds, helping you understand your options. When you are ready, I want to make sure you have the best possible choices available." The salmon arrived, perfectly prepared, but tasteless in my mouth. Jessica continued her sales pitch between bites, describing the amenities of the senior community with the enthusiasm of someone who'd already calculated her commission. Golf course, swimming pool, organized activities, transportation services, everything designed to make my current life seem inadequate and burdensome. "The financial benefits are significant too," she added, dabbing her lips with the cloth napkin. "Your house is sitting on prime real estate. The lot alone is worth more than you paid for the entire property 40 years ago. You could sell, buy into the community, and still have substantial funds left over for travel, hobbies, whatever you want to do with your remaining years." My remaining years? Jessica's language had become increasingly clinical, as if she were discussing the depreciation schedule of an aging vehicle rather than her father's life. "What about Maggie's quilts?" I asked. "Where would I keep them in a condo?" Jessica's fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Well, that's something we need to discuss. Obviously, you couldn't keep all of them. Maybe select a few special pieces for sentimental value, and we could find appropriate homes for the rest." Appropriate homes? Jessica meant auction houses, collectors, anyone willing to pay top dollar for Maggie's decades of careful craftsmanship. In her mind, the quilts were inventory to be liquidated, rather than memories to be preserved. "Some of those pieces are museum quality," she continued, warming to her theme. "Mom would probably be honored to know they ended up in institutions where they could be properly appreciated and cared for." The lie was so smooth, so perfectly crafted, that I almost admired its audacity. Maggie would have been heartbroken to see her quilts scattered to strangers, reduced to price tags and catalog numbers. She'd made each one with specific people in mind, gifts meant to comfort and warm the recipients for years to come. "You seem to have given this a lot of thought," I observed. "I'm a planner, Dad. You know that. Mom used to tease me about making lists for everything, but organization has always been my strength." Jessica's laugh sounded forced, nervous. "I just want to make sure you're taken care of, that you don't have to worry about practical details while you're grieving." The waiter refilled our wine glasses, and Jessica immediately took a large sip. Her hands were steadier than they'd been the day before, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes darted around the restaurant when she thought I wasn't looking. "I appreciate your concern," I said, "but I'm curious about something. How are you and Brad managing financially with all this time you're spending on my affairs?" Jessica's expression flickered just for an instant before the practiced smile returned. "We're fine, Dad. Real estate has been good to us. Brad's got some investments that are paying off, and I've got several listings that should close soon." Another lie, delivered with the same confident tone she'd used to describe the senior community. According to Maria Santos's investigation, Jessica had no active listings and hadn't closed a sale in over 8 months. Her real estate license was in jeopardy due to unpaid fees and missed continuing education requirements. "That's wonderful," I said. "I know how hard you both work." "We do," Jessica agreed, relaxing slightly. "But family comes first, always. Mom taught me that." The irony was staggering. Jessica was invoking Maggie's values while planning to liquidate everything Maggie had held dear. She was using the language of family love to justify what amounted to financial elder abuse, wrapped in the rhetoric of care and concern. "Speaking of family," Jessica continued, "I've been thinking about the will reading next week. I know it's just a formality, but these legal proceedings can be emotionally difficult. I want you to know that I'll be there to support you through whatever paperwork needs to be handled." Support me? Jessica's version of support apparently involved helping me sign away my home, my memories, and my independence as quickly as possible. She was already positioning herself as my advocate and protector, the responsible daughter managing my father's decline. Robert Chen seems very competent. I trust his guidance. "Oh, absolutely. Robert's great. I just want to make sure you understand all your options before making any binding decisions. Sometimes lawyers can be overly conservative, you know? They err on the side of caution when more aggressive strategies might serve your interests better." More aggressive strategies. Jessica was preparing to challenge Maggie's will if it didn't meet her expectations, already laying the groundwork for legal disputes that could drag on for months while her debts accumulated interest and her creditors grew impatient. The meal continued, with Jessica painting increasingly detailed pictures of my future in the senior community, the profits from selling my property, the peace of mind that would come from simplified living. She had answers for every possible objection, solutions for problems I hadn't even considered, and a timeline that would have everything resolved before summer ended. "I don't want you to think I'm being pushy," she said as we waited for the check. "I just see how much you're struggling, and I want to help. Mom would never forgive me if I let you suffer alone when there are perfectly good alternatives available." Jessica paid with a credit card that she slid across the table with practiced casualness, but I noticed her quick glance at the receipt, the slight tightening around her eyes as she calculated the tip. Every dollar mattered now, even as she projected abundance and generosity. Walking to our cars, Jessica linked her arm through mine with daughterly affection that felt both familiar and foreign. "Thank you for dinner, Dad. I needed this time with you. Sometimes I feel like we're drifting apart, and that scares me." "Family is important," I agreed. "It is, and I want you to know that whatever happens, whatever decisions we need to make, I'm on your side. We're in this together." She hugged me,
And for just a moment I caught a glimpse of the little girl she'd once been, vulnerable and needy beneath all the manipulation and calculation. "I love you, Dad," she whispered against my shoulder. "I love you too, Jessica," I replied, and meant it, despite everything. The disease had changed her, twisted her priorities, and corrupted her values. But somewhere beneath the addiction and desperation was still my daughter, the child Maggie and I had raised with such hope and devotion. Driving home through Denver's quiet streets, I thought about Jessica's performance over dinner. She'd been skillful, hitting all the right emotional notes while advancing her agenda with subtle precision. If I hadn't known about the gambling debts, the forged documents, and the secret investigation, I might have been convinced by her apparent concern for my welfare. But I did know, and in 3 days Jessica would discover that Maggie had known too, and had planned accordingly. The will reading would strip away all of Jessica's careful manipulations and force her to confront the reality of her choices. Maggie's final lesson would be delivered with the authority of legal documentation and the weight of unconditional love demanding accountability. That night, I called Brad. He answered on the second ring, his voice cautious and strained. "Harry? Is everything all right?" "I had dinner with Jessica tonight," I said. "She seems very concerned about my future living arrangements." Brad was quiet for a long moment. "She's been talking about that a lot lately. The senior community, selling your house. She's got it all planned out." "What do you think about her plans?" Another pause, longer this time. "I think Jessica's scared, Harry, about money, about the future, about a lot of things she won't talk about. Sometimes when people are scared, they make plans that aren't really about helping other people." "Are you scared too, Brad?" "Yeah," he admitted quietly. "I am, but maybe not about the same things Jessica's scared of." We talked for 20 more minutes, and by the end of the conversation, I understood that Brad was ready for whatever revelation the will reading might bring. He'd been carrying the weight of Jessica's secrets for too long, watching her spiral deeper into destructive patterns while feeling powerless to intervene. The will reading was now just 3 days away, and all the pieces were falling into place exactly as Maggie had orchestrated. Jessica's desperation was driving her toward increasingly aggressive tactics. Brad's conscience was preparing him to support whatever tough love might be necessary. And I was finally ready to honor my wife's wisdom by letting her plan unfold without interference. Maggie had known our daughter better than anyone, had loved her enough to risk their relationship in service of Jessica's ultimate redemption. The gambling addiction had stolen my daughter's authentic self, replacing it with this manipulative stranger who calculated relationships in terms of profit and loss. But diseases could be treated, addictions could be overcome, and people could be saved if they were willing to accept help. In 3 days, Jessica would have to choose between her addiction and her family, between easy money and hard recovery. Maggie's final gift to our daughter would be the gift of consequences, delivered with surgical precision and uncompromising love. The morning of the will reading dawned gray and overcast, typical Colorado spring weather that matched my somber mood. I dressed carefully in my best suit, the one Maggie had helped me pick out for Jessica's wedding 5 years ago. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was wearing clothes chosen to celebrate my daughter's happiness to what might become the defining moment of her reckoning.
Robert Chen's office felt different this time, charged with the weight of impending revelation. Jessica arrived precisely on time, accompanied by Brad, who looked like he'd aged a decade in the past week. She wore a conservative black dress and minimal jewelry, projecting respectful grief while her eyes darted around the room, cataloging assets and estimating values. "Good morning, Dad," Jessica said, kissing my cheek with practiced warmth. "How are you holding up?" "As well as can be expected," I replied, taking my seat across from Robert's massive oak desk. Robert appeared carrying a thick folder and wearing the expression of a man about to deliver difficult news. He settled behind his desk, adjusting his glasses as he surveyed the 3 of us with careful attention. "Before we begin," Robert said, his voice measured and professional,
I want everyone to understand that this will reading may contain some unexpected elements. Margaret was very specific about certain provisions, and she asked me to explain the reasoning behind her decisions. Jessica leaned forward slightly, her confidence unwavering. Of course, Mom was always thoughtful about everything she did. Robert opened the folder and withdrew several documents, spreading them across his desk like cards in a high-stakes game. Margaret Thompson's last will and testament was executed 6 months ago, with myself and 2 witnesses present. She was of sound mind and clear intent when she made these decisions. "We understand," Jessica said, her voice tight with barely contained anticipation. "Please, go ahead." Robert cleared his throat and began reading in the formal language of legal documents. The opening paragraphs covered standard provisions, the appointment of executors, and the handling of debts and taxes. Jessica's fingers drummed silently against her purse as she waited for the important part, the distribution of assets that would solve all her financial problems. "To my beloved husband Harold Thompson," Robert continued, "I leave our home on Maple Street, the cabin in Estes Park, and all personal effects, with the understanding that these items represent our shared memories and should remain in his possession for as long as he desires." Jessica's smile remained fixed, though I noticed a slight tightening around her eyes. The house and cabin represented significant value, but she'd already factored them into her inheritance calculations. "To my daughter, Jessica Thompson Miller," Robert read, his voice taking on a more careful tone, "I leave the sum of $500 and my collection of thimbles, with the understanding that these gifts represent the extent of her immediate inheritance." The silence that followed was deafening. Jessica's face went through a series of rapid transformations, from confusion to disbelief to dawning horror. Brad's hand moved protectively toward his wife's arm, but she jerked away from his touch. "I'm sorry," Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Could you repeat that?" $500 and a collection of thimbles," Robert repeated gently. "That's impossible." Jessica stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "There has to be a mistake. The house, the quilts, the cabin, where does all of that go?" Robert turned the page, his expression sympathetic but unwavering. "The remainder of Margaret's estate, including her quilt collection, investments, and all other assets, will be held in trust pending Jessica's completion of a certified gambling addiction treatment program. Upon successful completion of treatment and demonstration of 1 year of recovery, Jessica will receive access to the full inheritance." The color drained from Jessica's face as if someone had opened a valve and let her life force pour onto the floor. "Gambling addiction? What are you talking about? I don't have a gambling problem." "If Jessica refuses treatment or fails to complete the program," Robert continued reading, "the entire estate will be donated to the Colorado Coalition for the Homeless, specifically their program supporting women and children affected by addiction." Jessica's carefully constructed facade crumbled completely. "This is insane! She can't do this! I'll contest it! I'll take this to court and prove she wasn't competent when she wrote this ridiculous document." Robert reached into his folder and withdrew a thick stack of photographs and documents. Margaret anticipated that reaction. She hired a private investigator and documented Jessica's gambling activities extensively. Bank records, casino surveillance footage, credit reports showing gambling-related debt in excess of $200,000. "You had me investigated?" Jessica's voice rose to a near shriek. "How dare you? How dare both of you violate my privacy like this?" "Your mother loved you," I said quietly, speaking for the first time since the reading began. "She was trying to save you." "Save me?" Jessica whirled toward me, her face twisted with rage and desperation. "From what? From living my life? From making my own choices? You've destroyed everything. Everything." Brad finally stood, his voice calm but firm. "Jess, maybe we should listen to what the treatment program involves. Maybe this is a chance to get help." "I don't need help," Jessica snarled, turning her fury on her husband. "I need my inheritance. I need what's rightfully mine. And if you can't support me in fighting this travesty, then maybe you should leave too." The treatment program is voluntary, Robert said, his professional demeanor unshaken by Jessica's outburst. It's a 6-month residential program at a facility in Colorado Springs, followed by ongoing counseling and support groups. All expenses would be covered by the estate. 6 months! Jessica laughed bitterly. 6 months locked away like a criminal while my debts pile up and my life falls apart? This isn't love. This is punishment. This is revenge from beyond the grave. I watched my daughter disintegrate before my eyes, addiction and desperation stripping away every pretense of the person she'd once been. This was what Maggie had seen, what she'd tried to prepare me for. The disease had consumed Jessica so completely that she couldn't recognize salvation when it was offered with legal documentation and professional support. "Jessica," I said, standing slowly and moving toward her, "your mother saw what this addiction was doing to you. We both did. This isn't punishment. This is a lifeline." "A lifeline?" Jessica backed away from me as if I were contaminated. "You've cut the rope and called it rescue. You've stolen my inheritance and called it love. Well, I won't accept it. I'll fight this will, and I'll win. And when I do, I'll make sure you never see me again." She grabbed her purse and stormed toward the door, pausing only to deliver a final, devastating blow. Mom was a foolish old woman who wasted her life on worthless quilts and charity cases. Just like you're a foolish old man who's about to die alone because he chose strangers over his own daughter. The door slammed behind her with finality that seemed to echo through the entire building. Brad remained standing by his chair, his face pale but resolute. "I'm sorry, Harry," he said quietly. "She's not the woman I married. Hasn't been for a long time." "Will you encourage her to get treatment?" Robert asked. Brad nodded slowly. "I'll try, but honestly, I think she'll fight this will before she admits she needs help. The addiction has convinced her that everyone else is the problem." 3 weeks later, I received papers notifying me that Jessica was contesting the will on grounds of mental incompetence and undue influence. She'd hired a lawyer with money borrowed against her house and was prepared to wage a legal battle that would consume whatever resources she had left. But Maria Santos had done her job well. The evidence of Jessica's gambling addiction was overwhelming, documented with photographs, financial records, and testimony from casino employees who remembered her desperate late-night sessions at the high-stakes tables. The will stood, and Jessica's legal challenge only delayed her access to treatment while accelerating her financial collapse. 6 months after the will reading, I received a call from Brad. Jessica had finally agreed to enter the residential treatment program after her house was foreclosed and her marriage dissolved. The addiction had cost her everything, but it had also brought her to the rock bottom that sometimes serves as the foundation for rebuilding a life. I visited her at the treatment center in Colorado Springs, a peaceful facility nestled in the foothills with views of snow-capped peaks. Jessica looked younger somehow, vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since she was a child. The anger was gone, replaced by a fragile hope that reminded me of the daughter I'd raised. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, tears streaming down her face. "For everything. For the funeral. For the things I said. For the person I became. Mom saw what I couldn't see, and I hated her for it. But she saved my life." "She loved you," I replied, holding my daughter for the first time in years. "We both did. We both do." Jessica completed the treatment program and emerged with the tools to rebuild her life without the destructive patterns of addiction. She worked part-time at a nonprofit organization, attended support groups, and slowly began to understand the value of things that couldn't be measured in dollars and cents. The inheritance remained in trust for another year while Jessica proved her commitment to recovery. When she finally gained access to the funds, she used them not for luxury or status, but to establish a foundation supporting families affected by gambling addiction. Maggie's final lesson had taken root in soil that seemed barren, growing into something beautiful and meaningful. Justice had been served not through punishment, but through the patient cultivation of accountability and love. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up.
Just click and check them out.